Welcome to FO Talks. With me is our old friend Sebastian Schäffer. He is the head of IDM, the Institute for the Danube and Middle Europe, and Eastern Europe. Sebastian is an expert on the region, a scholar, and an excellent political analyst. He's joining us from Vienna today. Welcome, Sebastian.
Thank you, Atul. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Today we are discussing Moldova. There has been an election in Moldova, a parliamentary election. It occurred on 28 September 2025. Apparently, Moldova chose Europe over Russia in 2025. But before we get ahead of ourselves, Sebastian, tell us who won, who lost, and why is that important?
Well, thank you. Yes, you are right. It was a surprise victory for the Party of Action and Solidarity, PAS, that was in power since the last elections 4 years ago in 2021. And they had an absolute majority in the parliament. And it wasn't clear that they would defend this absolute majority, which they did. So there was a lot of discussion about having to go into a coalition with maybe other parties that will make it into the parliament. It was very clear that the patriotic bloc will make it. This is a bloc consisting, amongst others, of the Socialist Party and the Communist Party, both of which have ruled as presidents in the past decades. Until Maya Sandu became president for the first time in 2020. She is also from the Party of Action and Solidarity, was re-elected last year in 2024.
So explain to us what exactly is the system, because I'm already a bit confused. So these were the parliamentary elections, but the presidential elections were last year. So clearly they don't happen at the same time. Who has power? Does the president have power? The prime minister has power? Is it the prime ministerial system or the presidential system, or a hybrid like the French one? And explain to us why this election was important, this election, the parliamentary election in particular.
So it is a parliamentary system. This was the main reason why this was so much more important than actually the presidential elections. But it has been very much centered around the figure Maya Sandu, who is the face of the Party of Action and Solidarity.
And she's the president. She
is the president. Mm-hmm. For a brief period, she was also prime minister back in 2019. Mm-hmm. Then 2020 became the president. She already ran in 2016, lost against Igor Dodon, who is the party leader of the Socialist Party. Very briefly, it used to be even the case that the parliament elects the president until 2016, but the Constitutional Court declared it unconstitutional, and now the president is elected directly again, which of course gives it a lot more visibility and also credibility. And Maya Sandu used that to advocate for a clear pro-EU integration path of the country. Because there were also parties who have advocated for this before. There have been parties, it's for instance another opposition party, the Alternative Bloc, who advocates also for European integration, but for a different kind of European integration, which was always baffling for me, because I don't know that if there is a different approach. Behind it is, for instance, the mayor of the capital in Chisinau, Cheban, but also the former presidential candidate from last year, Alexander Stoyanoglu, but they were polling at around 15% and now got around 6%. So that's something that was also surprising. The party of Renato Usatsi, our party, it's called. He's a former mayor. He also made it into the parliament. These three parties can, to more or less extent, considered to be actually pro-Russian, but it's oversimplifying. It's always more complicated. You know that. We can go into details if you like. And there is another party that made it into parliament, which was not something that was expected. That's the Democracy at Home party. And they are actually right-wing populists that are advocating for a reunification with Romania. And they were heavily amplified on social media. And this was surprising because it sort of mirrored what was happening in the Romanian presidential election, when suddenly a party, or in Romania, the candidate received a boost in views on TikTok. They were polling at around 1%, but now made it over the threshold of 5% and are in the next Moldovan parliament.
Excellent. So it is quite complicated. Does it have a proportional representation system like Germany, the parliamentary elections, or is it first past the post like the Anglo-Saxon system in, say, US and the UK?
Thankfully, it's much more easy than in Germany. So it's a proportional representation system, but not first and second vote. But you have one vote. It's calculated according to the electoral output. So PAS received a bit more than 50%, which translates into 55 seats in a 101 seat parliament. So it's pretty even according to your electoral result.
Okay, so proportional representation, parliamentary system, but with a directly elected president with a fair bit of power. Now, let's explore Moldova a little bit. Give us a little bit of color. We know it's a country of merely 2.4 million people. That is smaller than a medium-sized town in India or China. Just to give context to our listeners, we know it used to be a part of the Soviet Union. We know it is practically landlocked. You informed me it has access to the sea via the Danube, but it's practically landlocked, sandwiched between Romania and Ukraine. Tell us more.
So one important thing to know about the country is that when it became independent from the Soviet Union in 1991, they had almost twice as many people living there. So there were around 4 million, 4.5 million back then. So a lot of people left the country. And this is really one of the big challenges that the country is facing.
Where did they go?
It used to be you could make pretty much a distinction based on gender. So the males would go to the Russian Federation and construction. The females would go to the European Union to work in taking care of children, elderly, etc. It's a bit more mixed now. But it's fairly easy to either receive a Russian passport or a Romanian passport, which gives you access to the single market and the four basic freedoms of the European Union. And then a lot move, of course, to Romania, but also Italy has a huge minority. We see in Germany, but also here in Austria, there are quite some Moldovans with a Romanian passport, which is, I mean, in general, it's the more skilled people that are mobile, and this is, of course, one of the major challenges that the country is facing. That this brain drain is really something that the country is struggling with, which is why I think, to a certain extent, this true pro-European integration path attracted so many voters in the diaspora, because they hope that this will elevate Moldova a bit more towards European standards, and then give opportunities for them to also move back.
And the diaspora can vote in the election.
the diaspora can vote in the election. They do more and more. We have an increase of almost 200,000 votes from the parliamentary election in 2019 to the parliamentary election in 2025.
So
there's still much more potential from outside the diaspora, but there are certain limitations that are done in terms of the number of voting booths that are available, and also the number of ballots that are available.
I see. So are there a fewer number of voting booths and ballots outside, so it becomes more difficult to vote?
It also depends. For instance, one thing that was criticized, especially by the opposition parties, but also from the side of the Kremlin, is that in Russia they only had two places where they could vote, and there were also only a total of 10,000 ballots that were provided. Whereas, as I said, we had in all other countries where the diaspora was able to vote, including also the US and Canada, there were, I think, 270,000 ballots were cast outside. So 260-ish thousand were probably cast outside the Russian Federation.
Understood. So an election with still elements of the process that need smoothing out, and perhaps where the pitch is sometimes tilted in favor of one side or another. Let's talk about, you've mentioned Russia, you've mentioned Mars and Venus, as I would say. Women going to Venus and men going to Mars. But Moldova is a diverse country, tiny but diverse. You have Transnistria, you have Gagauzia. Both these regions have elected pro-Russian parties. Explain the divisions, and what do you think happens now?
Yeah, this is one of the probably $2 million questions. The region in Transnistria is actually a de facto state. Nobody recognizes them, not even the Russian Federation themselves, although they supported them in probably one of the craziest civil wars in the post Soviet Union breakup. Crazy that the reason for it, if we want to very much simplify it, is because in the Soviet times, in Moldova, the national language is Romanian. And in Soviet times, this Romanian was written in the Cyrillic alphabet. With the independence on the 31st of August 1989, the parliament in the Soviet Republic of Moldova decided to return back to the Latin alphabet. And there were fears that this would...
You said return back. So does that imply that before the Soviets took over Moldova, the Latin alphabet held sway?
Yes.
Okay. And when exactly did the Soviets take over? Because the revolution occurs in 1917. Then there was a civil war in Russia as well. The White Russians fought the Red Russians. There were many factions. Other foreign powers were involved. And it's only by the early 1920s, really, that the Soviet Union has reconquered parts of the Russian Empire and reconstituted the Russian state or the Russian Empire in the name of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. So the Latin alphabet was used because it used to be at a certain point in time also part of Romania.
Moldova was a part of Romania.
Yeah. So it's history is a very long and winding road, as we all know. But to maybe quickly answer your question, because we might have to do another FO talk on the history of Moldova, and I actually have a much better expert on that, my friend Sergio, who can do that. But so during World War II, Moldova was occupied by the USSR. So I think in 1940, the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic was formed.
I see. So it was as late as World War II. It wasn't after the Russian Revolution that Moldova.
Oh, no.
Oh, wow. So very recent.
So it's, I mean, again, I'm not really firm on the exact timeline when that happened, but it's when it became the Moldovan Socialist Soviet Republic. That was in the 1940s. That I'm certain of, and then it lasted until 1991 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and there were fears in the region of Transnistria, which refers to the river there, that they would lose their Russian heritage, and that there are attempts to reunify with Moldova, and so they basically went to war over the use of an alphabet, and this war caused certain casualties, up to 1,000, and then was frozen. And since then, the Russian army is present there, and it's a de facto state. But international.
We're talking about Transnistria, basically. That's under Russian control. You have Russian troops there, and they are sitting on the border of practically both Ukraine and, of course, Moldova.
Yeah.
It's a bit like Georgia and Abkhazia.
It's a little bit different in the sense that here they are sitting there and can't be. So there is no possibility since the full scale invasion to actually. I mean, since 2014 basically, but even more so since the full scale invasion. So they don't have access anymore to their troops. They sit there on old equipment. There is no rotation possible because they don't have any access to it. And this is why also there were this Odessa is so important, and this would be a hub for the Russian.
I see. So Odessa in Ukraine is strategically important for Russian troops to establish logistics links with troops in Transnistria.
Yeah, exactly. The Transnistria itself is I mean, they are dependent on this Russian support here, especially gas supply, as many others are. But the region itself is governed by two oligarchs. They have formed a conglomerate which is called Sheriff, and they have a football club. Some might know this actually because at a certain point they beat Real Madrid in the Champions League in a game.
Get to play in Champions League.
Yeah, because they are dominating the Moldovan league. Because for having access to the Champions League, they gladly play in the Moldovan league, because the Transnistrian league is not recognized by UEFA. Anyway, so there is I would say a substantial business interest and less an ideological one this time. At this point in time in Transnistria, which also shows the result. I mean,
what is the business interest? Are there minerals there? Is there gas there? What makes it so valuable for Russia?
Not from the Russian side. I meant from the oligarchs in Transnistria. Okay. The situation was that they would get cheap gas, they turn it into electricity, and then sell this to Chisinau. This was one. And then a lot of, for instance, cheap textiles come from Transnistria into the European Union. They had a record share of exports last year, which was over 80%. It dropped a little bit to, I think, 70-something% so far this year. But they have a lot of exports going into the EU, and almost 50% of imports are also coming by now from the EU. And it shows in the electoral results, because the alternative bloc of the socialists and communists, they got around 50% in Transnistria, but they got 80% in Gagauzia, which is a autonomous region in Moldova. But they are ideologically behind that. So there is a distinction that we need to make when it comes to why people there are voting for the populists.
Tell us about this region you've just mentioned, which sounds like a region created for Lady Gaga.
Well, maybe Gaga created herself after the region, because this autonomous region was there before her, I guess. Yeah. So it's an autonomous region in the south of the country. It's spread across a couple of rayons there, and its capital is Comrade, and they have their own Bashkan, it's called, so to say the head of the autonomous region, and that maybe already gives you a hint. It's a Turkic language that they are speaking there.
Yeah, we should tell our viewers and listeners that this part of the world was once a part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was divvied up between the Ottomans and the Russian Empire in the early 20th century, maybe as late as 1912. I'm no expert on the history of the region. I remember through the reading I did before we spoke, and of course after that there was a brief independent Moldovan Republic, and then apparently, as you said, during World War II, the Soviet Union annexed it. So there is a complicated history to the region, as you find in the Balkans, as you find in many other parts of the world. Over to you, sir.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so here we see a more ideologically driven voting behavior towards the oscillating towards the so-called pro-Russian parties. Yeah? And they are to a very high extent against becoming an EU member. They would rather join the Russian Federation, actually. So this is already a quite complicated situation. But then you also have other minorities in Moldova. So there is a lot of diversity, as you mentioned. There are also Bulgarians are an important minority. Ukrainians, of course, are an important minority. And the situation after the full-scale invasion, with the Russian 14th Army being present in Transnistria, intensified also to a certain extent, because there were always rumors that there would be also an attack coming maybe from Transnistria, or that, for instance, the Ukrainian armed forces would liberate Transnistria.
I see. So the situation is extraordinarily complex, and it's a divided country. And surprise, surprise, there are allegations even about the elections. According to the Moldovan government, the Kremlin spent 200 million, the equivalent of 1% of Moldova's annual GDP, on disinformation and bribing voters. Apparently, on election day, bomb scares were reported at polling stations for the non-resident Romanians, the expatriates in Italy, Romania, Spain, and even America. One of Russia's banks is set by the Moldovan government to have been opening accounts and transferring money to Moldovan voters in pro-Russian parts of the country. So explain, regardless of whether these allegations are true or not, seems to be the case that Russia is still active, not just by sending troops in Transnistria, but also in influencing the vote. So explain to us Russia's actions and calculus.
Well, there is, if we look at the presidential elections, there is a clear divide between a pro-European path and a more orientation towards the Russian Federation in the country. And the Russian Federation is exploring this. I mean, they don't want another EU member in the region. They don't want the country to transform into a proper and stable democracy. So they are investing a lot of resources, and especially also through an oligarch that was present with his party in the last parliament, Ilan Shor. The party was called Shor, which was ultimately banned. He fled to Israel and then went to Moscow. And the allegations that they buy votes are proven true in the case of 2024 presidential election. An investigative journalist was part of the group that was then offered money for their vote, and they were supposed to receive WhatsApps on which person to vote for in the presidential election.
So this was an independent investigation, but there was these allegations did not make it to any court of law, I suppose, or did they? Were they proven in a court of law where there's a higher standard of proof?
So what happened is that this illegal party financing led to the ban of a couple of parties, amongst others the Shor. Yeah, so that happened, and Ziarul Digada, which is the investigative journal, has received even prestigious prizes for their investigative journalism that they did. And what also happened, and this is something that probably led to less possibility of influencing through financing, was that the police sent letters to the people that have sold their votes in 2024. Because what we could see now, I mean, I've just returned and talked to many people, not only in Chisinau, but I've also been a bit to the countryside. And in 2024, a lot of them said, yeah, of course I sell my vote. I got this and that. And the police sent them letters. They were not fined. They did not have to go to jail, but they had to go and report to the police station and say, look, this is illegal and this is not correct to sell your votes. And that diminished the amount of voting that could be directly bribed. And another thing that apparently...
I mean, you couldn't do it in many countries. In much of the third world, people buy and sell votes. That's common knowledge. Many of the poorer countries have this issue. And if not directly, it is through populist promises. One politician shows up and says, I'll give you free water. Another shows up and says, I'll give you free electricity and send you 1,000 pesos or whatever the currency is to your account. So this is a challenge for all democracies, especially the poorer ones.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in Moldova, in this case, it's lei that they receive. Or what we also saw is that there were even euro bank accounts that were
more attractive
to bribe, and probably so also
Europeans doing the bribing too.
Oh no, they received the bribes through EU-based or euro currency accounts in the European Union.
Got it.
A lot of money did not reach like the voter also. So there was a lot of money that went anywhere but the voter apparently. And so there's a lot of the security forces of the state have been much better prepared There have been much better countermeasures.
So let me stop you. Russia's actions, you're telling me, let's focus on the answer to the question, have been persistent and have been quite sophisticated. And it's basically an influence operation in Moldova. And their calculus is to keep Moldova within the Russian arc of influence. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They failed spectacularly 2 times now. And I think a lot of people in Moscow were very unhappy.
I see.
At around 4 o'clock on Monday morning, when it became clear that PAS would even get an absolute majority.
Okay.
There was an idea that these 3 pro-Russian parties that I've described would maybe get together 50%.
Yes.
And the idea was, that they then could go into a coalition. What they wanted to achieve was that PAS would have to go into a coalition with one of them, and not be able to implement the reform agenda. So this is a maximum defeat for Moscow, but also the opposition in Moldova.
So now you've mentioned the opposition, so let's talk about the opposition as well. The opposition accuses the government of fear-mongering and undermining the democratic process. We know from press reports that the government shut down opposition television channels without court authorization. The opposition argues that the government has portrayed political opponents as traitors and Russian stooges, and they have withheld economic statistics during the election campaign. Now, the other thing the opposition claims is that in Transnistria, the local population cannot vote in the region, but they can come to Moldova and then vote. And they slashed the number of voting locations for Transnistrians by more than half. That is the allegation. And so this caused traffic queues, this hampered voting by Transnistrians. So just as there are allegations of Russian interference in Moldovan elections, there are also allegations that the government, PAS, has not exactly played it all fair and all by the rules. What do you say to that? You were there, by the way. Our viewers and listeners must know that you were very much there, and you visited the country for 10 years. So you have some idea of what you're talking about.
A little bit, yeah. So on the one hand, yes, that's true. But I mean, the Transnistria, according to international law, is also Moldova, but it's not controlled by the Moldovan authorities, right?
The Russians are sitting there.
They need to come to a territory where you have control in order to ensure that the votes can be cast properly. So this is all good, I would say, in fair to preserve the electoral integrity. I even talked to an election observer that was there, because there was, of course, a lot of interest, and also within ODIHR there were election observers, and so far everything has been according to international standards, free, fair, and the integrity was preserved. But yes, of course, they have limited a little bit the number of voting possibilities where those buses had to come, out of experience that they had in former elections, where there were organized buses and people were mass transported to voting booths in order to cast their ballots and influence this election. You certainly could argue that, I mean, I mentioned that there were fewer ballots available in Russia, and it's clear that the diaspora in Russia probably votes differently than the diaspora, say, in the US or Austria. But to a certain extent, that was also done in order to limit election interference, and I think that was rightly so. This fear-mongering accusations and creating an environment that made it difficult for the opposition, I would say, is wildly exaggerated because they have their own channels, they have their own bases, they have the possibility to mobilize. They did so. Again, the integrity was preserved of the elections. What you could see, there were open discussions. There is no, you don't have to be afraid to go there and say, I'm voting for the alternative bloc, I'm voting for the patriotic bloc, I'm voting for whatever. So this is not something that was limited by the government. You could even say that they also used these type of tactics. Yeah, there was a lot of allegations around, if you vote for PAS, if you support Maya Sandu, then certain things will happen, and that was aiming to scare the population into voting for pro-Russian parties. Overall, I would say it was a fair game. The thing that you could say and that you could accuse PAS of, which I have also done in some of the analysis that I've published and the talks that I've done about it, is that the space for other pro-European parties is virtually non-existent. And PAS has sort of incorporated all of the pro-EU path tendencies, which led to the effect that a lot of people I spoke with said, I am supporting a pro-European path, but I wouldn't vote for PAS if there would be a credible alternative that could make it into the parliament that would have the same pro-European agenda. And this is something that in the long term is going to be a challenge, and that PAS will have to deal with over the next 4 years.
All right, so let's talk about PAS and Maya Sandu's goal of finalizing the acquis communautaire, which means, for those who are not European, implementing every EU directive and legislation by 2028. And they're doing this because this is a precursor to joining the EU. So, number one, or rather, what follows on from this fact are two questions. Is this even feasible, given Moldova's tricky history and background and diversity and tensions? And number two, should Moldova even achieve, the acquis communautaire, will the EU and its member countries be ready to accept Moldova as part of the EU?
Yeah, this is the second $1 million question. I would say split into those two parts. I will start with the first part probably. So the even on the ballot, PAS advocated in the party logo EU by 2028. Yeah? So they want to finalize the negotiations. Is that feasible? We did a study at IDM last year that we published. We looked at the history of EU enlargement negotiations, not the time when they started to apply until they finally ratified the accession treaty. That's a more longer process because it has to be ratified by all 27 countries, and this will be EU member countries, and this will be important when I answer the second part of the question in a minute. Only looking at the time the negotiations took. Do you want to make a guess who was the longest successful negotiation? Which country negotiated the longest?
I'm blanking. I wouldn't have an idea in any case.
I can tell you also the shortest one was the UK with 12 months, which means it took them 3 times longer to get out of the EU until they get into. The record holder at the moment is Portugal still. No? On average,
I wouldn't have guessed. I would have guessed an Eastern European
yeah,
country. This is,
I
yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed it either before I looked and did the analysis.
The UK makes sense. The UK I knew because the UK is a big economy, and the UK within the EU makes the EU really powerful. It gives the European economy heft, and it also gives the EU a lot of diplomatic expertise. So it makes sense. It is a marriage that, in theory, could and should work.
And they were, I mean, it was easier times back in the 1970s. There weren't that many regulations. There was no Copenhagen criteria back then, and they were pretty much aligned in the democratic aspect, but also in the market economy aspect. This was different in Portugal. They just came out of a military fascist dictatorship.
Salazar. Portugal
Yeah,
and Spain were ruled
yeah,
by Salazar and Franco, for our
yeah,
viewers and listeners, until the
yeah,
1970s. So the
yeah.
Portuguese and Spanish democracy is more recent than, say, the Indian one, which is what people often forget.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to get to is that the average negotiation time of all successful EU enlargement negotiations was 3.5 years.
Mm.
So that means it is in theory possible to do that. Yeah?
It's 2025 today.
Yeah, so it's possible to do that. The screening is done. That was announced last week. Also, by the way, for Ukraine. The question is rather if will the EU member countries allow them to start negotiations. A little advantage that Moldova also has, it's a smaller country. The neighboring country, Romania, with the same language, is already EU member. All the legislation exists in Romanian, etc., etc. So I would say it is possible, and integrating a country that has a little bit more of inhabitants than the city of Vienna should be doable. The big question, though, the big second part of the question, though, is if the European Union member countries will be ready. And here, I'm a bit afraid that there might be countries that are not in favor of EU enlargement. Austria is one of them. The recent Eurobarometer shows that there are countries where there is no majority for EU enlargement. A very challenging one certainly is going to be, for instance, France. If they decide, for instance, to hold a consultative referendum for EU enlargement, currently none of the countries, of the candidate countries, would receive a majority. They did polls recently. The country with the highest polling, still below 50%, is actually Ukraine, which is much harder to integrate for various reasons. And then there is a follow-up.
Population, geopolitical,
and the ongoing war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we might end up at a situation that we have never seen before in the history of European integration, that a country is fulfilling the acquis communautaire, as you said, and then will not be allowed to join the European Union. And if this happens, I'm convinced that this is the end of European integration. And this is something that is a clear...
That's a bit dramatic.
Yeah, but it has been overly described as the most successful foreign policy tool of the European Union. Yeah.
It means it's the end of... You could argue it's the end of European expansion, not integration.
Yeah. But expansion insinuates exactly what the Kremlin is trying to tell us, that the EU is some sort of evil empire that is expanding and like sucking in those countries. You know how you join the European Union?
Yeah.
You have to fulfill the acquis communautaire, and then they actually have to let you.
I mean,
how do you join the Russian Federation?
Forget what the Kremlin is saying. The truth is, for whatever reason, and actually simply for access to a bigger market, for democratic processes, and in fact, an escape from the Russian bear, likes the embrace of the Russian bear with its sharp claws, people have or countries have chosen the EU, and
Yeah.
and the EU has expanded, and so so you cannot just say that it's the end of integration. So what may happen is that the EU may not expand further, and it may just remain 27 states, but maybe the EU integrates a bit more in certain aspects, and maybe there is subsidiarity in other aspects, as you've spoken about, because there's no way that the EU countries could negotiate with, say, the US or China as separate economic units. They simply could not in 2025.
So one thing, instead of expansion, I really prefer enlargement.
Okay, enlargement.
This
Okay.
is
No,
what
words
is.
have meaning, so I'll go with your term. I stand corrected.
I've recently published an article on the potential of the Danube for EU enlargement, and I was arguing with the editors because they provided expansion in the title, and so I will have to continue to argue. Otherwise, the poor ones had to change the title, and now I just let it slide. No, but it's really something that is used in Russian narratives, that expansion, NATO expansion, EU expansion to our borders, but it's voluntary. The country join, and we might actually arrive at the point where we don't allow them in. And you don't voluntarily join the Russian Federation. That is occupation. What is happening there? And anyway, what I would say,
it will be what you Germans call a Zeitenwende. If Moldova fulfills the conditions of the acquis communautaire, and the EU says yes, but and doesn't open the gate, that'll be the end of European enlargement as we know it.
Let's settle for this. I give you this. It's maybe not the end of European integration in total, but it's the end of EU enlargement. I think this is an accurate formulation that we can both agree upon.
Got it. So my final question to you, a controversial one, and I say so because I have a copy of Samuel Huntington on my desk currently. What is transpiring in Moldova? Is this yet another chapter in the great game between EU and Russia? Is it a clash of civilizations? My co-author, who retired from the CIA, mentions that countries of Eastern Europe chose the West. Progressively, the West has moved east. Poland was once a part of the Russian bloc, Warsaw Pact, behind the Iron Curtain. And bit by bit, the Iron Curtain has moved to the West. And that is because people have chosen the freedom, chosen the free market, chosen free movement of goods and services and people over a more centralized, autocratic, czarist model. And is that what we are seeing, not just in Moldova, but in Ukraine, wherein some people want to join the ideal and the reality of the EU and therefore look to NATO as a security guarantee, and Moldova is doing the same?
So, yes and no. I think the great game here is rather because it's less ideological as it used to be, because I would say that the Russian Federation is a very capitalist country, and they also want to make money and want to trade and want to do that, but they want to impose a different type of political system. They want authoritarianism. They want full control, no plurality of opinions, no opposition, no real opposition, control every aspect of the state.
Understood.
And
so
this is the
Tsarist, it is the Tsarist political model. Tsarism without the Tsar.
Yes.
Or Putin,
And
or Vladimir Putin as the new czar.
maybe he wants to be something important, but yeah, rather czar than the general secretary of the Communist Party. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I think, I mean,
And also
what
the
he is
even the economic model is oligopolistic, whilst the EU model is far freer.
yeah,
You do have anti-competitive
yeah,
practices which Brussels enforces. You
yeah,
do have. It's easier for a small entrepreneur to get started. Yes, there is red tape, as we know, in Germany, in Austria. It's difficult for
yeah,
entrepreneurs, but it's far freer than, say, the Russian model, where only the people close to the president get all the natural resources and then
yeah.
basically live off the fat of the land.
Exactly. So that, I would even say, so it's rather the Godfather, yeah, that sits there and has his cronies around him. If you fall out of grace, then you fall out of a window, literally, as we have seen. But anyway, maybe more seriously, and to end here, I think we have an end game between a future free democratic Europe or an authoritarian, up to fascist ruled Europe. And this is the great game, maybe, even if it's not, if it's small in a global scale, because Europeans do not matter that much anymore, as it was the case in the maybe last great game. But for the individual in the countries, I think this is going to be very decisive. And having a little son, I want him to grow up in a democracy where he can choose what he wants to do and doesn't have to think about what he's saying, because this is how he's growing up, and he tells me already now what he thinks and what he wants to do and what I have to do. So I want to keep the plurality of opinions, the diversity that, for instance, a country like Moldova represents, the possibility for minorities to coexist, to not have to think about your sexual or political orientation. Even if it's still also a challenge in Moldova, it's not a free and democratic utopia, but PAS has the possibility to work towards that. And we should support them to implement this, not only with regards to European integration, because there's a lot of challenges at home, and PAS finally needs to work on them. They have achieved a lot. They, counterintuitively as it might sound, ironically have to thank the Kremlin, because if they wouldn't have attacked Ukraine and would not have started a full-scale war, I don't think that Moldova would be a candidate country. So Ukraine, by defending themselves, is also protecting Moldova, not only the European Union. And I think they are very grateful for this. And I think the majority of the population has understood that. I hope that in the next 4 years, the party can deliver, Maya Sandu will deliver, and then also we, as EU member countries and societies, will not let them down and also deliver.
Excellent. On that optimistic note, from Vienna, Sebastian Schäffer, thank you very, very much for making the time for us. Those of you who liked our discussion, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you sign up for our newsletters. You can follow us on LinkedIn and other social media too. All the best from Atul Singh in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Until next time.
See you soon.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.